Joining us now on this portion of Beyond the Beltway is Sidney Blumenthal, a longtime advisor to Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. He has authored a new book called The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, a self-made man from the early years of Abraham Lincoln's life. But Sidney has agreed to talk about some contemporary politics as well. Sidney, I guess the first question I want to ask is, given the decision or the report that came out earlier this week about Hillary Clinton and the State Department and her emails, of which you are part of that story, how devastating do you think the most recent information is, and does it give the Republicans the ammunition they will need to make the email scandal a viable issue for the rest of the campaign?
Well, I think the key thing is to wait for the Department of Justice, FBI inquiry into the emails as to whether or not anybody deliberately, intentionally, consciously placed classified information where they should not have. That's the real case of whether or not there's wrongdoing. I remain very confident that they will conclude that did not happen. In this case, the recent Inspector General report from the State Department, we're dealing with a technology that's changed over time. We're actually dealing with emails, which is from years ago. When I was in the White House in the Clinton administration, we had not much of a policy of handling emails. They just came in, and these are rules that have been shifting, and there are bureaucratic turf wars over who has control of that, and basically they've all been accounted for. This report also criticizes Colin Powell, who was Secretary of State, for using a private email. But I think the serious one is the FBI report.
You have been described as the biggest Clinton cheerleader in American journalism, and you switched from being a journalist to a political operative and key advisor to President Bill Clinton and a close advisor to Hillary Clinton. What was it about the Clintons that caused you to switch from being one of the most respected political journalists, and you still are respected in that way, but you're now viewed as a political operative and as a political Machiavellian, if I might say? What was it about the Clintons that made you make that switch?
Well, I also hope I'm now thought of as a historian with my Lincoln book.
The Lincoln book.
Yeah,
which is about very far away from where your real life is.
Yes, this is about 2 decades ago. I was working as a journalist in Washington. I'd worked at the Washington Post, the New Republic, and the New Yorker magazine. I had known the Clintons for a long time. I've now known them for about 30 years on a personal basis. And President Clinton asked me during the transition to his second term after his election whether I would serve in his administration as an assistant. And I thought, having covered White Houses and presidencies, to see it from the inside was something I may never get to do again, and also to participate in it. So I took the chance to do it, and it gave me an incredible experience and understanding of the workings of politics and government at the highest levels.
This current presidential campaign, according to what Donald Trump has said, could become a referendum, or it could regurgitate all of the Clinton years. Obviously, he will focus on the negative aspects, the impeachment trial, Monica Lewinsky, and other scandals, and Hillary's role or alleged role in that involvement. Do you understand why some Americans still think that's a relevant issue?
I think most Americans have processed this long ago, and Trump is trying to recycle old dirt that has already been through the washing machine. We've all experienced this.
You don't believe there's a new generation of people that don't know much about the issue and don't know specifically about what Hillary did and what Bill did and how the American people reacted to that's new to them, that's fresh to them?
Well,
or is it just not germane?
I think it's not particularly germane, and if there's a fact that people should keep in their mind all along, it is that President Clinton was acquitted. in the impeachment trial. I think that the election will be fought between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton on a different basis. It'll be on the, people say an election is about the past or the future. I think it'll be about both. But in the future, it'll be about which of them has a plan for dealing with the anxieties of a middle class under stress in a modern global economy.
Excuse me, I want to get to the personal side, because when did you meet Bill and Hillary Clinton?
I met Bill and Hillary Clinton when I was a reporter for the Washington Post. We had mutual friends who had known Bill when he was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. And I met them in 1987 and continued that relationship. I had no idea what would ever happen to them. Or he was governor of Arkansas. She was the first lady of Arkansas. She looked. She had long brown hair. She had glasses, looked like thick.
So you knew him when he gave that speech that lasted apparently, or seemed like for hours and hours at the convention, I believe in 1988, and people said, "There's a guy that just ruined his career because he failed on the big stage."
Morning after that speech, my wife Jackie and I were in the convention center, and Bill was wandering around, and he cornered me, and he said. He got terrible reviews for delivering this lengthy speech nominating Michael Dukakis. It was going to be his great moment, as we remember, and instead the crowd booed at the end and cheered when he said an in conclusion.
Yeah.
So I don't think I've told this story. Bill says to me, it wasn't that terrible, was it? And I said, well, it was not good. And he says, they told me to do this. They approved this speech. And he was deeply upset. He was kind of feeling that his career may have been at its end. And then he decided to go on the Johnny Carson show and play the saxophone and redeem himself.
Arsenio Hall.
Oh, was it? No. This was Johnny Carson.
With Johnny Carson? Okay,
first, yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize he went with Johnny, and he was self-deprecating about it, because
he was
I remember I was at that convention and I saw him just wandering, not with a huge entourage. Again, the day after, and he looked like a politician who was very dejected. He did not look like a happy camper. I want to spend just a few moments talking about something else, because part of your when you were at the White House, Rahm Emanuel was at the White House. You were both from Chicago. You were both aggressive young political operatives, and there was a falling out. The story goes that it was Rahm Emanuel, when he was chief of staff for President Obama, that he's the one that told Hillary Clinton she could not hire you at the State Department, which is what she wanted to do. Give us the origins, in your opinion, your view, your side of the story. The falling out between you and Rahm Emanuel. What caused that?
Well, I don't feel that there's a falling out. I regard myself still as friendly with Rahm, and I'm certainly friendly with his family and his brothers, and have known them for a long time. And my parents have known Rahm's parents as well. We're Chicagoans. What happened, Hillary asked me if I would serve in the State Department with her, and the political team around President Obama was still feeling competitive from the primaries of the 2008 contest, and they did not want people who had been part of Hillary's political team.
So there was nothing that took place between you and Rahm when you were both on the Bill Clinton team that happened, that was the seed for him to retaliate many years later?
No, nothing. Rahm and I were always friends, and remained friends. When he taught a course at Northwestern, I came to his class and spoke and maintained contact with Rahm.
Do you believe there is a way for him to escape the current political situation that he is in, and would you acknowledge that it's a pretty devastating political situation here in Chicago?
Well, Rahm is facing a real crisis here in Chicago of racial discord, dealing with the police department which is a very long-term problem, and the problem of the pensions. So I think he has his plate full, and he also has to deal with the governor, who is not acting like his friend.
One last question. If Hillary Clinton is successful in November, what role are you going to play in the Hillary Clinton administration?
Truthfully, my only thought is to return here and talk to you, Bruce, next year about my next volume about Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, so we could count you. We could count on you coming back at least for the next 3 years, talking about the next three volumes that are coming out.
You can count on me serving the 16th president.
But again, would you like a role with Hillary with that administration? I don't know why you wouldn't, because obviously, if she's elected, she's going to be the president of the United States, and you have certainly access to her. Why would you not want to return for another 4 years in Washington?
Well, the only thing I would say is, I hope always to be her friend.
And when you come back next time, I want to deal with some other issues about what is it about her that causes so many people in the country to be upset. We'll do that when you return the next time to talk about Abraham Lincoln. Our guest has been Sidney Blumenthal. The book is The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln. I'm Bruce Dumont. Beyond the Beltway will continue shortly. Don't go away. Bruce Dumont back in Chicago. We continue with Beyond the Beltway. Thanks very much for joining us. Special guest right now, Sidney Blumenthal. Sidney Blumenthal is one of the leading political operatives and advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton over the years, and a native Chicagoan. So welcome back, graduate of Sullivan High School. Nice to have you back in Chicago. And in the early days of this program, was a guest on this show for a number of times. But you're back now talking about a new book that you've published. It's about Abraham Lincoln. It's called The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, a Self-Made Man. And I guess my first question to you would be, with all of the books that have been written about Abraham Lincoln, what was the slice of his life that you felt needed exploration? Because this is the first of several books you're writing on the subject.
Yes. This is the first of 4 volumes. I've written 4 volumes. They're going to be published one a year. This one deals with Lincoln's early life up to the age of 40, when he rises from extreme poverty to become a skilled political man who has served 1 term in Congress and acquired the political skills in Illinois and in Washington eventually to become the great emancipator. And I use my own background to understand Lincoln, I think, in a new way, and provide an original interpretation of Lincoln as a politician. He was of the first generation of Americans who were professional politicians. That's how he made himself. And Lincoln was uniquely self-made. I have been a journalist for decades. I was a correspondent in Washington who covered presidents. I served in the White House with the president. I've been in campaigns and elections. And I think I have gone through the research in a way and have an angle of vision that's different from a lot of other people. And I think I understand the motivations of people who are political. And Abraham Lincoln, who we think of as sitting in that great monument above us, was actually a living, breathing politician to the marrow of his bones.
And he loved it. I mean, because the popular perception is that he was so noble, he wouldn't dabble in politics. But he would roll up the sleeve. He would dabble big time.
Well, his law partner, William Herndon, he had a 2-man law office, said politics was his heaven. And Lincoln learned it from the beginning in Illinois. From the age of 23 on, he ran constantly for office. He was the leader of the Whig Party. There was a major party called the Whig Party. He spent most of his life in that party. He was called the Sangamon Chieftain. He was head of the Springfield Junto. He was the power against his great rival for decades, Stephen A. Douglas, leader of the Democratic Party in the state of Illinois.
Tell us about his first inclination about slavery. How did his concern for slavery, how did that evolve?
Lincoln said he was naturally anti-slavery. He was actually born to it. His father, who was a poor dirt farmer semi-literate, fled Kentucky across the Ohio River into Indiana to get away from slavery. He was a white man. Why? Because he had to compete for wages against slaves. And so the Lincoln family began its life, really, fleeing slavery. Lincoln grew up in his family in these small, tiny, emancipationist churches, as they were called, in rural Kentucky, and they were anti-slavery. And so Lincoln had this in his DNA in the beginning, and it developed. He went down the Mississippi as a boy like Huck Finn to New Orleans, and he was shocked at what he saw. Open-air emporium of slaves sold on street corners. And his view of slavery was highly unusual at the time. He was never an abolitionist, but he was anti-slavery. The abolitionists were like the radicals of the day.
Mm-hmm.
He was more of he wanted to get ahead as
Were they more the elites?
Well, they were more from New England and religiously
Right. Mm-hmm.
oriented.
Right.
They were more, a lot of the abolitionists were ministers, and the Illinois Anti-Slavery Society, which was the basis of abolitionism in Illinois, was created by an association of Protestant ministers. So that was the basis of that movement. It was considered to be immoral, slavery.
You said that he ran. How many times did he run and lose before he won his first seat?
He ran and lost his first race for the state legislature, and then he won. He was this raw kid running for office, and he was known as the Slasher because of his sarcastic, cutting style. He developed, the Lincoln that we think of, malice towards none, charity for all. That took decades to develop into that character. He started as somebody who would stand on platforms in Illinois and cut his opponents apart, and that's how he gained his credibility within the Whig Party.
Donald Trump.
Well, not like Donald Trump. He was.
But did he eviscerate them on political grounds or on personal grounds?
He eviscerated them on political grounds,
Mm-hmm.
and he fought very hard for his issues. And his issues in Illinois were what was called internal improvement, or what we would call infrastructure. And he became the Whig floor leader when he was 27 years old on the Illinois legislature.
What was his claim to fame? I mean, when he was working in the Illinois legislature, what were the things that he was a big winner on? You mentioned that he worked on, but did he have statewide notoriety?
Well, he was well known in Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
He created a lot of the infrastructure of what was then the modern economy of Illinois. The
Mm-hmm.
Michigan-Illinois Canal is
Right.
due to Lincoln. Lincoln's responsible for creating that. The movement of the capital to Springfield from Vandalia, which was a rough-and-tumble frontier town, and then the building of the state capitol and the creation of Springfield, that was Lincoln's doing. He did that. And there was a lot of trading and lobbying that went on to be able to move that capital. So Lincoln was a real player in Illinois.
But as you said a few moments ago, a political obsession with Stephen A. Douglas,
Totally.
personally as well as politically?
Lincoln and Douglas knew each other well. Douglas had courted Mary Todd before Lincoln married her. Douglas was also a self-made man. He was a Vermonter who turned himself into what he called a Westerner. He was the leader of the Democratic Party. Douglas was the real demagogue. Lincoln feared his use of illogic and non sequiturs and vicious personal attacks, and Douglas also used racial attacks against Lincoln and anybody else who stood in his way. Douglas rose higher and faster than Lincoln. Lincoln always was trailing after Douglas. But the thing is that Douglas, who became a real star of the Democratic Party, was from Illinois. And eventually, the only person in the whole country who could challenge Stephen A. Douglas on his home ground was Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And as a result of Douglas being here, Lincoln rose.
Right.
Without Douglas, there's no Lincoln.
Right. So he had to have his foil, and he happened to they were fighting for the control of the state of Illinois, and then it grew beyond that, obviously.
Illinois became the platform that the whole country looked at, especially in that Senate race in 1858 where they staged their famous debates.
In the presidential run, and your book is, again, about the first years of his life. It isn't necessarily all the presidential things, which, again, the subsequent volumes will deal with. But what was his early association with the Chicago Tribune, which historically was very responsible for his push to the presidency? But how early was there a liaison between this country lawyer from downstate and the Chicago Tribune?
Chicago Tribune was a very important part of Lincoln's rise and part of his organization. And the editors of the Tribune, like Charles Ray, the first editors, were operatives who worked very closely with Lincoln. At first they distrusted him because they thought of themselves more on the abolitionist side. Lincoln, however, gained their trust. They realized that he was the master politician they needed to make their movement work. And it was through that combination, that coalition, that Lincoln was able to create the Illinois Republican Party. The Chicago Tribune was absolutely indispensable to him, not only in creating the Republican Party in the state of Illinois, but also in winning the nomination of the Republican Party, which took place at a convention in Chicago in which the Tribune and their editors played a key role in rolling that convention for Lincoln.
If there were 24-hour cable news then, would Lincoln and the Tribune been able to get away with what they got away with? If everybody was watching every move they did?
Well, here's my view. My view is that Lincoln played by the rules of the game of his day, and he vindicated his principles, ultimately. And he knew that it took 1,000 small political acts to achieve anything. He was a very skilled and experienced political actor. Would they have gotten away? Well, Lincoln was accused of all kinds of things. There were all kinds of so-called scandals, and Lincoln was involved in the back and forth. For example, we talk about a joke about Lincoln's doctor. Well, Lincoln's doctor, a man named Anson Henry, was put in charge of building all the public buildings in Springfield after Lincoln moved the capital, and the Democrats accused him of corruption and skimming money. And Lincoln, of course, had to defend him and got in the middle of this imbroglio. So what happens now is not so novel. This has been going on for quite a while.
But was the media of the day aggressive in calling attention to that? Again, if he had the protection of the Chicago Tribune, were there others that were letting the public know about sort of the different side of Abraham Lincoln, or a different side of Abraham Lincoln?
Well, all the newspapers of the day, without exception, were partisan newspapers. They were all party newspapers. Mm-hmm. Lincoln had his newspapers. He was the virtual co-editor of the paper in Springfield, and he anonymously wrote editorials. But guess who was the owner of the Democratic newspaper, the Register? That would have been Stephen A. Douglas. Okay. And Douglas didn't miss
So they all have their clout.
They all have their clout, and Douglas and the Democratic papers didn't miss a beat in attacking Lincoln and the Whigs and then the Republicans.
We're talking with Sidney Blumenthal. The title of the book is The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, a Self-Made Man. Tonight on Beyond the Beltway, back shortly from Chicago. We continue with Sidney Blumenthal, author of the book, The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln. We're talking about the early years of Abraham Lincoln. And how early in Lincoln's life did he meet Mary Todd? And it's been said that there would not have been an Abraham Lincoln without Mary Todd. Tell us a little bit about her and how that relationship began.
Mary Todd is a Southern belle. She arrives in Springfield to seek a husband. She's brought by her sister. Her sister is married to a man named Ninian W. Edwards, who is the son of the territorial governor. They're the most prominent social family in Springfield. They live on Aristocracy Hill. Lincoln is, as he calls himself later, a poor nobody. And he's entranced with this woman, this younger woman who speaks French, has gone to a finishing school. Lincoln's had only a few weeks of formal education. And he breaks up with her. He even has a nervous breakdown. Imagine what the media would have done with that. Mm-hmm. And after about a year, they're reconciled, and they get back together. Here's the thing about Mary Todd.
Is the nervous breakdown tied to the breakup of the relationship?
It is. Lincoln couldn't figure out how to approach the opposite sex, and it's also tied to his political crisis he had where he was publicly embarrassed. So it all happened at once. Lincoln didn't have a family at that point. He had separated himself from his poor family that had gone off to Cole County, Illinois, and he was basically on his own. He felt publicly humiliated. He had a deep sense of social inferiority that he tried to hide because of his background of neglect and poverty and ignorance that he grew up in, and that he had risen above.
He was an abused child? I mean,
he was an abused child.
Right.
His father would punish him for reading. He considered reading a form of laziness. Lincoln was determined to read, and he was curious about the world, and he learned about politics. He attached himself to local lawyers who had libraries. That's how he read the Constitution, law books, learned about the Declaration of Independence, history of the country. But back to Mary Todd. She's a political woman. Her father is the business partner and political ally in Lexington, Kentucky, of Henry Clay. She grew up knowing Clay. She was described as a child as a violent little Whig. And
Clay was Lincoln's hero.
Clay is Lincoln's idol. He calls him his beau ideal. He's one of the most prominent political figures of the day. He's the creator of the Whig Party that Lincoln is part of. And to be associated with Henry Clay through this woman is quite an achievement on Lincoln's part. Here's the thing about her, as I'm saying. She voices her political opinions in public discussions, and women are not supposed to talk about politics, but she doesn't care. And she has very strong opinions. And after they get married, Lincoln, of course, was fiercely ambitious. His law partner said his ambition was a little engine that knew no rest. But sometimes he would underestimate himself, and that had to do with his sense of social inferiority. But his wife would not allow him to do that. So one time when he was reelected to the state legislature, she said, "That's not good enough. You have to run for the Senate." She would always push him forward. She thought he was greater than even he thought he was.
Were they madly in love, or in your interpretation, did he see her as sort of a meal ticket to a better life?
I think that he was in love with her, and he remained smitten with her, and she was completely devoted to him and thought he was a spectacular person, and she thought he had immense potential. She revolted against her family, her upper-class family, to marry him. They called him a plebeian. And they announced their wedding to her family in one day, and they had to patch together a quick wedding within 24 hours. But this was a love match, but also a match of people of like political minds who also love politics, and it was a socially mobile move on Lincoln's part. He now was a member of the most prominent family in Springfield.
What political influence did she have on him? Obviously, she gave him the credibility and obviously led him to the White House, but how much of a political influence was she on him when he moved into the presidency?
She was a great asset to him. What we know about her and think about her from some historians is that she was a liability because she threw temper tantrums, she was volatile, she created embarrassing scenes. But Mary Todd was a political woman, and she knew how to lobby political people. And she knew, for example, that the very difficult Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts was somebody who needed special care and tending. And she would invite him over and have educated conversations with him. He was quite a scholar. They would invite him to the inauguration. Lincoln pulled a great coup. Sumner was sulking against Lincoln and playing with his program, and Lincoln pulled his carriage up in front of Sumner's house on the evening of the second inaugural, and he goes out and he pulls Sumner into the carriage and says, "I'd really like you to escort the First Lady into the inaugural ball." And Sumner is beaming. He's happy. So, and Mary Todd knows what they're doing, and she's part of this game. She's a real political player.
A little bit like House of Cards characters. You mentioned earlier that this is the first of 4 books that you've written, and you say they've already been written?
I've written, this book has just been published. The second book I've submitted to my publisher, Simon & Schuster, redrafting the third one. The fourth one, which covers Lincoln's great triumph in the war, his assassination, and then what happens to his legacy in Reconstruction, has been written. So one a year. I'm eager to talk about Abraham
You're going to be talking about Abraham Lincoln for a long time.
Well, there are worse things to do, and let me just say, I really enjoy his company.
Well, he's... and again, people still, if you think you know everything about Abraham Lincoln, there are 4 more books. One is out, The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, a Self-Made Man from 1809 to 1849. Again, Sidney Blumenthal has been with us. And Sidney, thank you very much. I'm Bruce Dumont from Coast to Coast and Border to Border. Thanks very much for joining us. Good night from Chicago.